them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty big, kind of scary, but super important.
Yeah, you could say that. We're talking about this Republican bill, this proposed legislation that everyone in D.C. seems to be buzzing about.
Exactly. The one that aims to slash taxes while at the same time making some pretty deep cuts to spending. And, the Senate's now pushing this forward, but the timing, well, it's a little, shall we say, interesting.
You got that right. I mean, the whole global economy seems to be teetering on the edge thanks to all these new tariffs. And right smack in the middle of that, the Senate decides, hey, let's overhaul the budget.
It's certainly a bold move. For our listeners who maybe haven't been glued to every headline, the Senate just started looking at this bill, like a month after the House Republicans kind of laid out their initial thoughts?
Yeah, a little over a month. And let me tell you, the Senate just barely got the green light to even start talking about this thing. 52-48, mostly along party lines, so you can already see how divisive this is going to be.
Definitely. So for our listeners who value their time and want to understand the meat of this thing without getting lost in the weeds, we're going to break it down piece by piece. We'll look at what's really in this bill and, try to figure out what it could mean for all of us, especially with all this economic uncertainty swirling around.
That's the key. There's a lot of noise out there, but we're going to cut through it.
So to start, let's talk about the scale of this thing. We're talking trillions, right? Initially, I think I saw something like 4.5 trillion in tax cuts and another 2 trillion in spending cuts. Huge numbers.
Those are the figures that were being tossed around, yeah. Trillions, with a T. But to be fair, the Senate seems to be taking a slightly different tack than what we saw from the House.
Okay, so right off the bat, we've got some intrigue. But before we get too deep into the Senate's version, let's zoom out for a sec. What's the big picture here? What are the forces at play, the motivations driving this whole thing?
Well, you've got the Republicans, right? They've been campaigning on tax cuts for, forever. So for them, this is about delivering on those promises. But on the other side, you've got the Democrats sounding the alarm, worried about what all these cuts could mean, especially for everyday Americans and those social programs that so many people rely on. And then, of course, looming over everything are those tariffs, adding a whole other layer of, let's just say, unpredictability.
And that's the million, or should I say trillion-dollar question, right? How do these tariffs impact everything?
Exactly. No one really knows for sure.
Okay, so let's unpack this big, beautiful bill. Let's start with the tax breaks. If I'm getting this right, the main idea is to make those tax cuts from Trump's first term, the ones that are supposed to expire at the end of this year, permanent.
You got it. That's the core of it. Make those cuts a permanent fixture. And that's no small thing, let me tell you. We're talking a massive shift in how the government collects revenue, and the effects would ripple out for years to come.
Right. Long-term implications. And this isn't just about keeping things as they are, is it? There's talk of adding even more tax cuts, right? Things like cuts to taxes on tipped wages and maybe even Social Security income.
There's definitely talk, yeah. Those specific cuts, they're not set in stone yet, but the general direction is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Cut. And, the Chalupa House version, they went all out, floated a whopping 4.5 trillion in tax breaks. Who knows what the Senate will land on, but they're definitely not shying away from big numbers.
And it's worth reminding everyone that those initial Trump tax cuts, the ones they want to make permanent, weren't exactly evenly distributed. They mostly benefited wealthier folks and corporations, didn't they?
That's true. The structure of those cuts was designed in a way that, higher earners and big companies saw the biggest benefits. So making them permanent, that would just lock in that advantage.
Okay, so that's one side of the equation, tax breaks. But then you have the other side, the spending cuts. This is where things get, a bit more heated, don't they?
Oh, yeah, this is where the gloves come off. It's where the parties really butt heads.
So what are we talking about here? What sorts of cuts are being proposed?
Well, the Senate's got this plan, right? They want to pump a bunch of money into border security, something like $175 billion. That's largely aimed at funding those mass deportation plans from, the previous administration that apparently haven't been too smooth sailing due to, guess what? Lack of funding.
Ah, the irony.
Right. They also want to beef up national security, give the Pentagon a bigger slice of the pie. But it's interesting because there was this earlier proposal for spending cuts, and it didn't really sit well with the House Republicans. So you can already see there's some infighting going on even within the same party.
And speaking of the House, didn't they propose something like $2 trillion in spending cuts in their version? What's the Senate thinking on that front?
So the Senate's starting a little smaller, talking about $4 billion in cuts to things like healthcare and other domestic programs. But here's the kicker. The GOP leaders, they've hinted that this could balloon up to, get this, $2 trillion.
Wow, so from $4 billion to potentially $2 trillion, that's quite a range. And it's no surprise that the Democrats aren't exactly thrilled about this, are they?
Not thrilled is an understatement. They're seeing red. Their argument is, basically, this bill is all about giving tax breaks to the rich while taking a hatchet to programs that help ordinary Americans. Things like healthcare, childcare, school lunches, the essentials. Senator Schumer, he called the proposals mean, nasty, and uncaring.
Ouch, strong words.
He wasn't holding back. And, when you step back and look at the big picture, the Democrats are essentially saying this is all backwards. It's taking money from where it's needed most and handing it over to those who need it least.
But of course, the Republicans have your own counter-argument.
Oh, absolutely. They're saying, hey, if we don't make these tax cuts permanent, that's like a $4 trillion tax hike for everyone. Their whole message is built around this idea that, these tax cuts and spending adjustments are crucial for getting the economy back on track. Senator Barrasso has been very vocal about that.
So we've got this clash of ideologies playing out, a real tug of war over priorities.
And it's all happening, as we said earlier, in the shadow of these new tariffs.
Right, those tariffs. Let's talk about that, because this isn't just some abstract economic policy debate. These tariffs are having real-world consequences, aren't they?
Absolutely. This whole tariff scheme, as some are calling it, has spooked the markets. It's not just here in the U.S., it's global. And China firing back with that 34% tariff on all U.S. imports starting April 10th, that really sent shockwaves through the system.
Yeah, it's like everyone's bracing for impact. And the reports are showing that global markets, even Wall Street, are feeling the pinch. This isn't just theoretical anymore.
Not at all. It's hitting specific industries hard. The U.S. electric vehicle industry, they're being called collateral damage. Even French wine producers are saying they're in for some rough times because of these tariffs. And, one article put it really well, saying this whole debate over the bill is happening at a risky moment for the U.S. and global economy.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, you can say that again.
So, given all that, the question becomes, how are they going to pay for all this? I mean, with the national debt already at something like $36 trillion, adding potentially trillions more in tax breaks without, finding ways to offset that, that's got to raise some eyebrows, even among those who normally support cutting taxes.
You're hitting on a really crucial point. Traditionally, the deficit hawks in the Republican Party, they'd be screaming for spending offsets to balance out any lost revenue from those tax cuts. But we're seeing something a little different this time.
What do you mean?
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham, who heads the Senate Budget Committee, he's making this argument that since the existing Trump tax cuts are already in place, extending them isn't really a new cost. So in his view, they don't necessarily need to be offset by spending cuts.
I can see how that would ruffle some feathers. And I bet the Democrats aren't buying that for a second.
Oh, they're calling foul. They see this as like going nuclear on the normal budgetary rules. They're accusing the Republicans of trying to sidestep the usual checks and balances that are meant to keep spending in check. And then there's the Senate parliamentarian who could throw a wrench in the whole thing if they decide to rule against certain procedural moves. It's getting pretty messy.
So where does that leave us? What's the next step in this whole legislative saga?
Well, the Senate's taken that first step, voting to start working on the bill. But that's just the beginning. Get ready for a vote-a-rama, probably Friday night.
A vote-a-rama. Sounds intense.
It is. It's this Senate thing where they basically speed run through a ton of amendments, voting on them one after another. It can go on for hours, sometimes all night, and it can get pretty chaotic. The Senate's goal is to then hold a final vote on the whole package, maybe even stretching into Saturday. And if they manage to pass it, then it goes to the House.
And that's where the real fun begins, right?
Yeah.
Merging the House and Senate versions into one final bill. Yeah. That's always a recipe for, well, let's just say lively debate.
Yeah. Lively is one way to put it. That whole reconciliation process, they're expecting that to happen sometime in May. Speaker Johnson, he's aiming to get everything wrapped up by Memorial Day. But with all the differences between the two versions and, the Democrats fighting tooth and nail, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Seems like a tight deadline. And, we can't ignore the bigger context here. Does the public even want these big spending cuts? What's the mood out there?
It's a good question. I mean, we've already seen some pretty big changes under the radar. Remember the Department of Government Efficiency that the Trump administration set up? That was the one headed up by, of all people, Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Whatever happened? with that?
Well, they ended up firing thousands of federal workers and shutting down all sorts of government programs. We're talking scientific research, education services, even stuff related to Social Security, tax filing, and weather forecasting. And now you've got these fiscal conservatives in both the House and Senate. They're pushing for even deeper cuts. So the public's reaction to all of this, how they feel about these cuts and how they're impacting their lives, that's going to play a huge role in how this all plays out.
And it sounds like the former president's fully on board with the Senate's plan, especially the cuts. I saw a quote where he called it, and I'm quoting here, complete and total support.
Yeah, he's made his position pretty clear. But, the Democrats aren't just rolling over. They're pulling out all the stops to slow things down, to shine a light on what they see as the disastrous consequences of this bill. Senator Schumer, he said, "We, tonight and tomorrow, are going to show just who they are." They're planning to use every minute of that 25 hours of debate time they've got, hammering home their concerns about potential cuts to Medicaid, veterans programs, and, of course, the whole tariff mess.
And Senator Merkley, he's got this slogan, families lose and billionaires win. It's pretty catchy, and it gets right to the heart of the Democratic argument.
It's a powerful way to frame the debate. It boils down to this fundamental disagreement about who benefits and who gets hurt by these changes.
So, to sum it all up, we've got the Republicans pushing hard for tax cuts and spending cuts, but they're facing some serious headwinds. Not just from the Democrats, who are worried about the impact on ordinary Americans and the national debt, but also from the whole economic uncertainty caused by these tariffs. It's a bit of a powder keg, wouldn't you say?
It is, and the path forward, it's far from clear. The House and Senate, they've got to find a way to reconcile their very different versions of the bill, and that's going to be a challenge, to say the least. And all this is happening against the backdrop of a global economy that's, well, let's just say it's on shaky ground.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully our listeners now have a better sense of what's at stake with this bill. It's a complicated issue, but it's one that could have big impact on all of us.
Absolutely. And it raises some really important questions that go beyond the specifics of the bill itself. Like, what does this all say about our priorities as a country? Who are we trying to help? And who are we willing to leave behind? These are tough questions, but they're ones we need to be asking ourselves.
And that leads us to a final thought for our listeners to ponder. Given everything we've discussed, the economic uncertainty, the political divisions, the potential impact on everyday lives, what do you think are the long-term consequences of enacting such major changes to our tax and spending policies at this particular moment in time? What perspectives are we missing in this debate, and whose voices need to be heard more clearly as this bill makes its way through Congress? Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the issues that matter most.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.